When we're stuck in that place of fear, we often don't see that there are so many opportunities right in front of us. When we just take one step, especially a creative step that is outside of our scope of imagination, outside the box, suddenly we get to see all of the possibility. And those possibilities are our future. They're your future.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from HonestyPill.com. You're listening to episode 15 of the Honesty Pill podcast. This season on the show, I'll be talking to innovative musician entrepreneurs who have created new ways of performing, new ways of teaching, and new ways of serving their audiences. My guest today is opera singer, business coach, and writer Maren Montalbano. A graduate of Tufts University and the New England Conservatory of Music, my alma mater, Maren has sung at Carnegie Hall in New York City, Walt Disney Concert Hall in LA, multiple theaters in Europe, and even performed on stage, get this, with the Rolling Stones. Wow. But Maren's career has suffered right along with the rest of us during this past year, but that did not slow her down. When live music performances disappeared during the pandemic, Maren turned her focus to the online world, writing, producing, and premiering a one-woman show called The Bodice Ripper Project as an interactive digital performance at the Philadelphia Fringe Festival. That show, along with the accompanying podcast of the same name, became an exploration of sexuality, feminism, and the journey to self-empowerment through the lens of romance novels. Guys, if you haven't listened to the Bodice Ripper podcast, put it at the top of your list. It's super fun, and you might even learn a little bit about opera while you're at it. So Maren is passionate about uplifting and amplifying new and diverse voices in classical music, which has fueled her work as a business coach for musicians. We're going to debunk some singer stereotypes, hear about Maren's experience working on a cruise ship when she was only 8 years old. You're even going to learn what it means to slow down, meditate, and move at what Maren calls the speed of plants. That actually sounds pretty good given our world these days. All right, let's dig into it and get into my conversation with Maren Montalbano. Okay, we have so much to talk about with my next guest. I could literally block out the next 3 hours and we still wouldn't cover all of it, but I'm going to try. Welcome to the show, Maren.
Thank you so much for having me, Chris. I'm really excited to be here.
So you can't have an interview with Maren Montalbano without talking about the voice. And I'm not only focusing on the fact that you're an incredible singer, but that you are also an artist who's passionate about elevating and amplifying new and diverse voices in the world. We're going to talk more about that later. But I've been thinking firstly about how musicians become. Like, why does music spark so strongly for some people and not for others? Where do we get our voices in the first place? Where did that spark happen for you? And I usually like to ask my guests, do you come from a musical background or a musical family?
I do come from a musical family. And in fact, there's a story. My mother is a classical violinist. My father is a jazz trumpet player. So I grew up learning violin and trumpet. I did not take to the trumpet, to be honest with you.
Look, I'll just jump in and say I'm not offended. In fact, I think even more highly of you because of that. But I knew there was a reason we got along so well, Maren.
But the story is that my mother was playing in the orchestra when she was pregnant with me, and her stand partner was also pregnant. And so everybody in the orchestra was taking bets on who was going to turn the page.
I love that so much. You actually picked up the violin when you were just 3 years old, but later started singing a lot, and you actually joined the San Francisco Girls Choir when you were 7. Was there something about singing that you were drawn to, like something that was different than playing the violin?
Oh, man, that's a really good question. Yes, there is something about singing that's different from the violin. Although, it's been said that the violin has the closest vibration to the human voice of all of the instruments. However, I don't know. It has something to do with part of it is the combination of words and music, because you can express so much wordlessly, of course. It's the ultimate communication tool. It spans across languages and various other things. However, there is something about putting music to words and having it come out of your body that is something completely different. It's totally different from using an instrument to do it. There's In fact, I truly believe that when I'm singing, I'm embodying the music.
That's fantastic. Well, I can just add to that a little bit is one of the things that I do when I coach audition strategy is the number one goal for instrumentalists is to transcend the instrument. The committee doesn't want to hear your great trumpet playing or your great flute playing. They want to connect with the core, the character. And you can only do that by allowing the instrument to get out of the way. So with a singer, and this is a great question to ask you then, is, what's it like to carry your instrument around with you and be using it anytime you communicate, even verbally?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's sometimes it can be difficult. Sometimes I wish that I could kind of like take it out, put it in its box, and then like go and have some fun. But I have to take care of it at all times. So that means I've got to drink water all the time. I've got to not be going out every night when nobody does that anymore anyway, but going out to loud bars and kind of abusing it. And it's interesting because I had to learn that lesson pretty early on. Right after college, when you're young, you kind of figure that you're in just completely, what's the word, invincible. So when you're right after college, I felt like I was invincible. I felt like I could go out and sing, as long as I needed to, and go out at night and drink and party. And I lost my voice. I lost my voice for a while. It was a huge wake up call. I actually started developing pre-nodes. So those are like nodes are these calluses that form on your vocal cords. And so this was like sort of like blisters, I guess. They can go away if you stop using them, So I had to go on complete vocal rest for a few weeks. That was very difficult because I was performing at the time. So I had to get special dispensation to go on vocal rest. I'm really, 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 really glad I did that because it taught me pretty early that it is so important to take care of your body, your entire body, because that is your instrument.
That's such an interesting intersection between technique and your desire to communicate, because there are some really well-known singers who are also well-known at being very aggressive singers, like U2's Bono, Peter Gabriel, Elton John. I think they all had suffered from those nodes that you're talking about in parts of their careers. And if you look at their early work, those musicians are like swinging for the fences. They're not, I'm assuming, I'm not a singer, but it doesn't seem like they're using very measured technique. And I bet since those people have had such long careers that each of them have gone back and figured out, I think I need a voice teacher. I need to kind of work this out and figure out my efficiency. Oh, that's so interesting. Can we talk a little bit more about your background? Because you said your dad was a trumpet player. Talk to me more about that.
Yes. He is a jazz trumpet player. He still plays. He's retired, but he actually lives in Bangkok, and there's quite a jazz scene in Bangkok, and he's kind of heading up the jazz scene there. And growing up, my days were filled with trumpet exercises, especially like the sound of just blowing into a mouthpiece of like just a I don't have a mouthpiece with me, but that sound, the buzzing sound, and then just going into a mouthpiece going do 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 do, like that was my childhood.
Did you ever get a chance to perform with him?
Oh yes, actually. My dad worked on a cruise ship for several years. He was music director of the Royal Viking Lines. And so for a month, I was allowed to come on the cruise ship with him as a part of his act. I was 8 years old. And we went to Scandinavia. So we kind of traveled from let's see, they picked us up in Oslo, and then we just sort of like dotted around from like Finland. We went to the USSR back then. It was the USSR back then, and Norway, up the fjords, that kind of thing. And I was in his show. I had a little kind of it was basically a little Shirley Temple act, and yes, it was really adorable. There is a YouTube video of it out there, so.
We will be linking that in the show notes. Thanks for that heads up. Wait, how old were you when this was happening?
I was 8 years old.
So you were 8 years old, and you were touring Scandinavia on a cruise ship, playing a Shirley Temple bit in your dad's jazz band. Just want to make sure I got that all right.
That is correct.
Okay. Wow. Maren, that explains to me a lot about where you got your musical personality, and we're definitely going to circle back to that later when we talk about some of your projects. But let's fast forward to when you weren't away at sea and you're performing with Opera Philadelphia. You're the operations manager for Grammy Award-winning choir The Crossing. You guys are amazing, by the way. I love it. Basically, you're doing all the singer things. So let's talk about singers for a minute. Are there any, or I should say, what sort of preconceived notions about singers do you run into? Because I know for a fact, as a trumpet player, we definitely have our reputations, and singers. I went to Tanglewood, I shared the dorm room with singers. You guys definitely have a thing. So what sort of notions are out there about singers?
Oh, goodness. Let's see. We love drama. That's definitely a thing. Singers can't count. That is another, I would say, misconception. I definitely know, as a singer who can count, I would like to dispel that myth. Yeah, but I mean, it's mostly the drama loving thing about singers. And it probably has something to do with the fact that a lot of the things that we perform are full of drama, like the texts and everything like that. So it's naturally going to attract drama loving individuals.
I mean, I brought the topic up as a joke, a little bit sort of poking fun at myself, because trumpet players, we have the worst reputations, and your dad knows all about that.
Oh, I think trombone players have much worse reputations.
Worse or just different. It depends on your perspective. But
Sure.
The point I wanted to make was, I remember singers at Tanglewood who, in the cafeteria, they would be bellowing, across the room, and they'd be practicing while they were walking down the hallways. They're constantly in singer mode. And that's kind of awesome in some ways, because there is no real disconnect between the instrument and the person. And of course, at those years, they were probably sort of experimenting with where they're at. But I think that is where singers can sort of get much further ahead than instrumentalists as far as connecting with the drama, with the character, and that instrumentalists really lose that. And, that's something that comes back into play when we talk about opera and we talk about musical character. Certainly some of the creative projects you've done get lost with instrumentalists.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I would say my mom taught me a lot about, my mother, the violinist, taught me a lot about finding the drama within the music when I was younger. And this was before I started singing with the San Francisco Girls Chorus. So I was already thinking about that before I even stepped foot on a stage. However, I can see what you mean. There are a lot of people, instrumentalists, who are so focused on their technique and just executing the technique that they leave very little room for the story of the music. And you know what? I believe that music truly tells a story all the time. It doesn't matter what kind of music it is. And it can tell a different story to whoever's listening to it. It's all subjective. What would I say to the people who haven't quite made that connection? I would say, go listen to something. Go listen to something that you are not very familiar with, a piece of music. Make sure it's an instrumental. Make sure that it has absolutely no words in it at all. And find the story for yourself. Figure it out. Like, tell your own story in the music that you're listening to.
That's so important. And I have to say, maybe it's just been my personal experience, but I feel like that is mostly lost in the orchestral world, and that very few musicians and conductors get to that place of the storyline and finding the contrast and the tension and the drama. So it's definitely, I mean, musically, that's a thing we need to come back to.
Isn't that so interesting though? Because like we all watch movies and film and television shows that have scores, and all of those, add to the drama of the story that we're watching on the television. So why can't we do that for ourselves in our own imagination?
Exactly. I love it. Speaking of drama and stories, in addition to both of us being graduates of the New England Conservatory, we have something else in common that I don't think you know about. This has something to do with throwing axes, turkey legs, and singing wenches.
Is it the Renaissance Fair?
Yes. Please, Maren, tell me how you became the music director of the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair.
Okay, well, I have to go back a little bit further. I have to go back to 1999, when I was an actress in New York, and I was just auditioning for various different things. Now, I do have to sort of say, I've always been a nerd. I've always loved Renaissance fairs. I, worked at them when I was in high school. So this is kind of my thing, my wheelhouse. But I saw an audition for the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair. Figured I might as well go ahead and audition, and I got in the cast to be there for a summer as an actress. So that was in 1999. I went there, packed up all my bags, my few possessions, and sublet my New York apartment and headed over to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And I just had a wonderful summer there. I met my husband there. And I met so many friends and just made some really wonderful connections. And I kept up those connections over the years. So when, let's see, it was 2013 came around, I got a phone call from the owner of the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair out of the blue. And he said, "How would you like to be the music director?" They needed one, and I just happened to be at the top of his mind. He figured he might as well, shot in the dark. I also happened to be looking for a new thing, so this was a perfect marriage of convenience, and it was wonderful. 3 years of working with casts, creating shows. Most of them were very bawdy shows. I wrote and arranged a whole bunch of music, and they're just such wonderful people there, and just a lot of fun.
When the owner of a Renaissance fair calls you, does he start the conversation with "Milady" or anything like that? I don't know why I imagined that. Maybe not. Okay.
No, it was "Hi, Maren," but
Oh, okay. Just Well, I have to say this. I mean, you're not going to see the pictures or the YouTube video for this because I've destroyed them. But I also wore tights and a frilly shirt during my freelance career. And although at the time it was quite shameful, I realized that every top freelancer in Boston had made their way through the King Richard's Fair in Carver, Massachusetts. In fact, I think my playing got a lot better down there. I played with some great players in a brass quintet and learned how to improvise in a classical style and to pivot and switch. And it made me actually a really good chamber musician. Granted, sometimes we were playing to 4 people and they were all completely drunk, but that, those were the early parts of my career. The body text, subtext, or not even subtext sometimes of those shows probably informed some of your later work. So we'll get there very soon.
I want to say one thing. So my dad had always felt a bunch of shame around wearing tights and playing herald trumpets. He did it every Christmas. There was a Christmas gig that happened, and he was always just like, all right, I got to put the tights on. I'm like, what's the big deal?
All right, I'm going to totally crowbar this conversation to another topic entirely, a more serious topic, because this is something that I know is important to you. And I want to talk about, where do you see the classical music world heading right now, as far as what sort of shifts in the institutions that have been the pillars of our industry? How are we sort of reacting, and how are they changing? Because if the pandemic has taught us anything, is that there is a lot more possibility in how musicians can work with each other, how we can put our stuff out there, and also ways that aren't working, ways that were inefficient, ways that were too expensive, ways that were guarded by gatekeepers. What are you sort of seeing as far as giving new voice to musicians?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I see the influence of individuals really rise much more than institutions. This past year has shown so many cracks in the paradigm the old paradigm that has been just sort of like clunking along. It's one thing, I guess, to be coming right out of music school and wondering, okay, what do I do next? And having somebody say, okay, all you have to do is audition for this orchestra and this orchestra and this orchestra, or this, young artist program and this place and this place. And if you get in, then you're golden. But that the problem is that there's just way more people, where there are way more artists than those positions. And what happens to those people? Do they just fade off into the dust? Do they decide that they are not worthy of anything, of being listened to? The reason that I feel so strongly about this is that I'm one of those people, right? I did not audition for any of the young artist programs because when I got out of college, I was flat broke. I was just broke. And so I started working, and I gigged a lot, and I auditioned for various weird stuff, which, I mean, I guess I'm a little odd, so that was right up my alley. But I did not go down that like traditional path. And I didn't even consider it until I was probably a little too old. I think it was in my mid 30s. So I was like 33, 34 when I was like, I wonder if that would be a good place. And I was too old. They, aged out of a lot of that stuff. And that's not right. I've actually had, from personal experience, I've had more success in my 40s than my 20s and 30s combined. So there is something to be said for just following your own path, finding your dream and sticking to it and standing in your power and not worrying about what the big institutions have to say. Look, the Met is wonderful. LA Phil, is great. New York Phil, like all of those institutions have produced amazing pieces of work, but they're not the only pieces of work. And the world is a really wide place, and there's plenty of room for all kinds of art. And just because you're not doing this one thing doesn't mean you're not actually meant to be shining in this other corner. One of the things that I've noticed during the pandemic is that there's a lot of people, obviously we've all lost jobs, right? Every single one of us, we've all lost jobs. And there's been this kind of general malaise where I've noticed different people reacting different ways. Some people are like, well, I guess I'd better figure out another way of doing the thing that I love. Some people are like, well, I guess I'd better pivot and do something completely different. And then there's a third group of people who basically stay in this place of fear, where they're just angry. They're angry at the world. They're angry at these institutions. They feel like they're owed something. That the institutions aren't doing enough, that they've messed up and it's all their fault, or it's all the government's fault, or it's all, COVID's fault, or something like that. And I have to say, there's a better way of living your life than living in that space. All that's going to do is just make you angrier and more sad and more fearful. And I'd like to offer a different way of looking at it. Maybe this is the perfect opportunity for you to figure out what you love and do that, and screw everybody else. Why not? I mean, what have you got to lose? And you've got so much more to gain. You have like fulfillment, creative fulfillment. Probably you'll be a lot happier just working on something you love. And who knows, this is also a possibility. You might actually make some money doing it.
So you're suffering through the same thing as everybody else. How do you find your inspiration?
I have found my inspiration by slowing down. This is really important. This is a very important thing that I learned in 2020 was we all really need time to just rest, take naps, meditate. I've done a lot more meditation this year, and I've done a lot of gardening. And those activities that have really just slowed me down and brought me down to I like to say, slowing down to the pace of plants, the speed of plants, really has opened up different parts of my mind. That's when I get my ideas. That's when I start getting really like I start daydreaming and thinking about like, well, what if I did something like this? And then it would like, if the daydream sort of fizzles out, then I know then that's not a good road to go down. But if the daydream continues and I start thinking about the next day and the next day, I'm like, oh, this is something I really need to pay attention to.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this interview. I just want to hop in here really quick and let you know if you are a musician who is ready to take the leap and bring your music and your skills and your knowledge to a whole new audience in a whole new way, my 6-month group coaching program, the Online Business Accelerator, launches on February 15th, 2021. There are limited spots available, application only, but I'm inviting you, my listeners, to hop on a free 30-minute discovery call with me, no obligation, right now. Go to honestypill.com, check out the Online Business Accelerator page, and click on any of the buttons there to get to my schedule link. Okay, it sounds like the orchestra's done tuning. I got to get out of here. Hope you enjoyed the rest of this episode. Okay, move at the speed of plants, take nap, rest, meditate. I'm just taking some quick notes here, Maren. Actually, you just reminded me of one of my favorite images or quotes, which is something like, you can't clearly see your reflection in running water.
Oh, that's a good one.
I can't remember who that's from, but you just can't. If there's all that energy and activity mentally or actually physically in your world, you just can't see your own reflection. You can't tell what's happening. So slowing down is, wow, that's the takeaway advice from this episode right there. Maren, you are obviously a champion of new music, and you've given a voice to so many premieres by composers, many of whom are friends of yours, like Jeremy Gill, Melissa Dunphy. You sing with The Crossing, you have your group Trio Eos, so much new music. Can we talk a little bit about your process? How do you tackle a piece of new music? How do you study? How do you prepare? How do you memorize something like that?
Haha, I have a whole memorization strategy, so I'm happy to share with you. Okay, so with new music, one of the first things that I like to do, if it's possible, is I ask the composer for some kind of sound file. Even if it's a MIDI, I don't care. I just need to be able to hear that sound world. There's so many different composers with different musical languages. It's not like you can pick up a piece from the classical era and go, oh yes, I know sort of how this is going to go. So the first thing I do is try to get a sound file from the composer, and then I listen to it. I really try to immerse myself in that sound world, in the musical language of that particular composer, because these days, like, you really have to know where it's going to go if you're going to be able to absorb the harmonies and the lines and all of that kind of stuff. Then I record myself singing these lines. I just record it. Sometimes, especially if there is the MIDI file there, that's really super helpful. But I'll slow it down and just record the slow version and then speed it up. This helps with memorization as well. So, you're sort of practicing and memorizing at the same time, taking things in small chunks, and just repeat. Okay, so that's the new music. Oh, some things that are really important. I talked a little bit about how singers can't count. A lot of new music has like kind of funky rhythms and time signatures and time signature changes and all of that kind of stuff. So those things are actually super important to practice. And I spend a lot of time really working on that. Some of the music that I've worked on has had, I'm thinking of this one particular piece that had a kind of impossible rhythms. There were, tuplets that said 11 over 13. How are you even supposed to calculate that? You can't calculate that as a human. So you just you figure it out. I like to use my computer to figure it out first, and then I guess, I'm like, well, it's mostly like this. And yeah, I mean, it's really about practicing, familiarizing yourself, not just with the sound world, but with the rhythmic world as well, and learning to love it.
There's a cool thing that happens though when you're working on like an 11 over 13 tuplet or something, is especially when you're in the ensemble. Sometimes if you just like loosen your focus just a tiny bit and go with the flow, it just sort of falls into place.
Yeah.
And other times it's a train wreck. But when it does fall into place, it's like, wow, how did we just do that? And also, why did you write it that way? Yeah.
Totally.
I want to just go on a quick tangent because you reminded me something about process. And you clearly have a very structured, organized, intentional process that has measurable outcomes and strategy. And I was just listening to an interview with Jerry Seinfeld, of all people. And he has a very specific process with his work as well. In fact, he's probably one of the most structured, creative people I've ever heard speak about this topic, where everything is broken down and organized and reworked and iterated. And he often talks about how the first, second, third, fourth, 10th, 20th iteration is not the one that kills. And you just have to keep going back to the well, failing, learning, getting something out of it, and creating. And I just loved hearing a comic, obviously someone who's so successful, talk about how it's not about talent. It's not necessarily even about hard work. It's about smart, intentional, structured work. And that's something that we can talk about. I know you're a fan of grids and spreadsheets and tech. We can talk about that in a minute when we talk about your coaching. But that's something I think a lot of creatives don't realize, is that there are other things going on than just the art that support the art.
So obviously, if you think about a painting, right? It's not just, you can just sort of throw a couple of blobs of paint on the canvas and call that art. Some people do, but even the pieces of art that look like blobs of paint on a canvas are actually very specifically placed blobs. And yeah, that comes with trial and error, that comes with structure, that comes with understanding sort of how the art is, what the foundation of the art is, and what you want to accomplish out of it. This is something that I talk with my clients all the time about. When they're going to start a new project, the first thing you need to think about is, why are you doing this? What's your why? Think about your vision and make that your North Star. That's the thing that's going to not just drive you, but it's also going to inform what your next steps are going to be. I've been thinking a lot about, different things, different shows that are coming out. I don't know if you watch Bridgerton on Netflix. I've been thinking about this a lot because I have a romance novel podcast, and Bridgerton is based on romance novels. And something that I noticed was that there are some things that are intentionally left out in this show. And I could tell what these people, the producers of this show, had in mind as their final vision, how to execute that vision. It doesn't matter. You don't have to deal with all of the details of everything, as long as whatever it is that you do follows that vision. So when you're talking about structure, that is, think about the vision as your foundation. And then you are going to build something on that foundation, build a house. And that house is going to have, you're going to need a budget, right? You're going to need a strategy for fundraising. You're going to need a strategy for marketing. You're going to need a timeline of how you're going to create that content, because the thing is, if you don't have that structure, you're just going to be sitting around thinking about these things all day long, but you're not actually going to be doing any of it.
I love it. And, this is something that you see with I see with my coaching clients, and certainly with my students, trumpet students, music students, is they just want to know what to do. Tell me what to do. Now, first of all, if I tell them what to do, the very next question is going to be, how do I do that? So what do I do? How do I do it? And then that begs the question, well, why are you doing it? If you don't know the why, you certainly won't know the how, and you certainly will never figure out the what. And the worst part about that is you're going to be asking me or your teacher or your coach or your mentor all these questions all the time. And the ultimate goal of a coach or a teacher is to, assist someone to doing something they can already do and to foster their own independent thinking. So I love what you're talking about. There's a great diagram with a circle about the what, how, why, and how if you don't have the why, there's no real structure to support the rest of it. Let's see. I really probably don't need to ask you this question, but can we talk about opera for a minute?
Yes.
What was the first opera you saw? This is a 3-part question. Okay, Maren. What was the first opera you saw? Why do you love this art form so much? And how should a person approach going to an opera if it's their first time?
Ooh. Oh, man, this is juicy. Okay. The very first opera that I saw, I'm pretty sure, was La Traviata. And my mom was playing in the pit, and she had, listen, both my parents were musicians, and so there wasn't a whole lot of room for childcare, so I got brought to a lot of rehearsals. A lot of the time. And so my mom was playing the pit of La Traviata, and I would watch this show from the audience, from the rehearsals to the actual performances. And I don't know, I loved it. There was just something about the extra-ness of it. It's larger than life. Everything on stage is larger than life. The love, I love you so much, I'm going to sing about it. Or I hate you so much, I'm going to sing about it, and then I'm going to kill you, and then I'm going to sing about it while I kill you,
Exactly. That's all you need to know about opera right there.
Exactly. But, we have all of these emotions inside of us, and sometimes they don't get a chance to come out. One of the things that I work a lot with in my coaching is dealing with fears. That's the number one thing that stops people from doing anything is that they're afraid. They're afraid of, what people are going to think of them. They're afraid of not knowing their own worth. They're afraid of a lot of different things. And those fears are magnified on the stage in opera. And there's actually a bit of catharsis that happens when you see them on stage in this larger than life form, that somehow they're not as scary. You can find beauty in them, in fact. Turandot is a Chinese queen who beheaded all the men who wanted to marry her. Of course, I mean they had to answer 3 riddles, and if they answered the riddles wrong, off with their head. And this one guy is like, I'm gonna do it. I think I could do it, and I'm just gonna go for it. And he does. But here's the thing. Once he wins her hand, she's like, I didn't want this. Why do you think I was beheading everybody? I didn't want to fall in love, and that shows this vulnerability in the sort of ice queen, sort of exterior that we all can, relate to. There's my cat. But anyway, there's a vulnerability within that ice queen exterior that we can all relate to, because we are all afraid of something, and we show this big, huge armor. And in the end, they fall in love. And this is kind of like a bit of a morality. The moral of the story is, if you go ahead and do the thing that you're afraid of, you might actually find happiness.
I love it. It's speed dating with an axe. Okay. Speaking of the extraness of things, when live performances disappeared during the pandemic, you turned your focus to the online world, writing, producing, and premiering a one-woman show called the Bodice Ripper Project. How did this become a thing? I'm just going to turn this over to you and let you explain this incredible project.
Okay, so I had originally planned for it to be a live show, like a cabaret style show. It was going to be premiered last September, September 2020. I had conceived of it in, let's see, my first thought was in March 2019. So I had been thinking about it for a while. I started writing drafts, started making plans, budgets, all that kind of stuff. And then the pandemic hit, and it became clear that this was not going to be a live show, if anything. And I decided to go ahead and turn it online, turn it into an online show. So I created a podcast called the Bodice Ripper Project podcast, which was originally intended to be kind of a supplement to the show, and now has taken a life on its own. But in this show and in this podcast, I tell stories that I wrote backstage at the opera. So, a little backstory here. I love romance novels. And when you're in an opera chorus, you have a lot of time backstage. And so I would start writing stories. I started writing these little romance stories based on whatever opera we were in. They're a little bit like opera fan fiction, like Noble number 3 plus Guard number 2, meet and fall in love. And I would do this for like every single show that I was in, and I would read them aloud to the chorus in the dressing room, and they loved it. And that's when somebody suggested, well, you should set this to music and turn it into a show. So that was the original plan, was to do it that way. But instead, when I turned it into this digital show, I reimagined myself in the dressing room at the opera, telling these stories to all of my friends, except they were all on the other side of the camera. And it was a digital thing. And I got a chance to really turn it into a story, not just about the romances, but about me and about what romance novels have meant to me as I was growing up. I had a bad experience with sexual abuse when I was a kid, and after that happened, I turned to romance novels as a way to heal and kind of find something outside of myself that I could look forward to. So I could actually, see these heroines stand up for themselves, own their own sexuality, and find love. And that really got me through that trauma. And writing and creating and performing this show with that story in it was another level of healing for that trauma that I was not actually expecting. So the whole thing was like really, really wonderful. I'm so happy that it happened. And I'm really grateful that it happened in the middle of the pandemic too.
What a powerful tool in your own personal evolution. But I just want to highlight also that you're using your story, your experience, and this creative project as a way to connect and bring other people into that world, and introducing them to an art form that a lot of people think you have to be super educated or, speak a different language. It's not. It's for everybody. It's music, and it's about the stories. And we've talked about that before on this podcast, how the thing that connects with audiences and retains them, I think it was Aubrey Bergauer's episode where she was saying what people really care about is the story, and where else is that more prevalent than in opera?
Yeah. In my podcast, I talk a lot about the opera itself, and then I tell the story. So it's not just me. It's not just story time. I talk about the opera. I talk about my relationship to the opera, that particular production that I was in. And so it is a way for people who aren't really, don't really know very much about opera to get a little bit of a taste of what it's like, and maybe be curious and take that step and maybe go see one.
So you're, what's it called? Cliff Notes, right? It's like the Cliff Notes for opera, but it's the salacious version.
Yeah.
I love it. I could see, a whole rebranding of all opera if this whole Metropolitan Opera thing doesn't come back, maybe your one woman show is going to be the new wave of that future. Speaking of grids and spreadsheets and your structural approach to things, like we talked about earlier, let's shift gears and talk about how you use that organizational talent as your work as a coach. What's your 8-week program coming up? Give me some details.
Cool. So my 8-week program starts on February 1st. It's an online course called Inspiration to Implementation. And it really takes you from having an idea in your head. We kind of talked about this before. There's a lot of people who have these really great creative ideas, but they don't really know what to do with them or how to bring them into the world. I have the practical experience of doing these things. I created my one-woman show. I launched my own solo album. I self-produced that. I've been an operations manager for a Grammy Award-winning choir. So I understand the administration part of it, and I also understand the artistic side. So I've used those two things to create this 8-week program that is designed to give you the tools that you need to launch your own project. Now, listen, you're not going to launch a project in 8 weeks. That doesn't happen, right? Like that's too little time. But in these 8 weeks, there are, weekly modules where we go over different themes. We talk about marketing strategy, for example, how to craft a really good bio, what your website should be looking like, where to be connecting with people online. We talk about budgets. We talk about fundraising. There's actually 2 modules on fundraising because that's so important. And we talk about leadership, how to create and assemble a team and head up that team. And really, again, this is all about stepping into your own power and owning your own voice. And the reason I'm so passionate about that, I talked about the fact that I really want to uplift and amplify new and diverse voices in the world. This is how I can do it. I can help you with all of the stuff that you don't really know, like that you may not have as much experience with. I can help you with that part. And the nice thing about this course is, look, they're all, everything's recorded. The videos stay up online for as long as you need them. I've got these really fantastic worksheets, and we have these group coaching sessions as well. So if there are things that are going on that you need specific help with, you can ask me for help, but you can also ask the community for help. And that's the other really essential pillar to this program, which is the supportive community of artists, like-minded artists that are going on this journey with you together.
Let's talk about asking for help for a minute and how things from community are born. And let's talk about askmaren.com. Can you tell me where that came from, what it is, and where can I get one of those red buttons that makes a sound when I press it?
Well, you came up with askmaren.com, Chris.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I knew there was a reason I brought it up.
I was just smart enough to snatch up the URL before you did.
So do you want to give the backstory on this?
Yeah, sure. So I don't know. There's something in my nature where I just kind of have the answers to a bunch of different random questions, specifically tech questions. I don't know why. I'm not sure. It's just something about me. And so generally, we were in the same program together early in 2020. And in our group coachings, there would be people who would say, talk about something, and I would say, oh, well, you can just do this, blah, 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 and I think I got to be known as the person to ask for these different things. So, yeah, somebody else, a friend actually who you don't know, said I would love to have an Ask Maren button, where I could just press the button, ask Maren, and then there would be an answer. Now, I don't have that quite, that intellectual property isn't quite, together yet. So I'm working on it. But in the meantime, askmaren.com is my website for coaching. And if you have questions about how to create these projects, have launch your own solo project, I'm here. I can answer those questions.
By the way, an offshoot from askmaren.com that maybe we can work on is some sort of like an Uber, an online Uber for short technical questions like, how do I remove a white background in Photoshop? Yes, you can go down a 4-hour rabbit hole on YouTube to find out the answer, but wouldn't it be cool to just have an app where you could get some tech geek like you who could just jump on in 30 seconds say, oh, just keystroke X, command Y, and that will take care of that. And I would pay dearly for that if you think about the time-work ratio. I don't know,
well,
something to think about.
The biggest problem is I don't actually have all the answers. Like, if I did...
Well, then you can outsource and create a whole empire of other creative singers. I mean, you guys have all that time backstage. You could learn all this stuff.
It's true.
So I want to just kind of wrap up and focus on a little bit about your why, your motivation. And one of the things I know you like to focus on is the idea that creating these projects, these solo projects, your own, the ones of your clients, can actually uplift other parts of your life, especially in the face of turmoil or injury or something like a pandemic. Can you just talk a little bit more about how that motivates you for the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, it's so interesting because this is a weird paradox. I hear so many people talking about how they've lost their creative spark during the pandemic. You know, this depression has kind of set in, right? And you don't know where to go, what to do. One of the reasons that I want to be more vocal and standing out more talking about this is that I don't think that there are enough people offering this as a solution to what's going on. Um, you hear about music therapy, you hear about art therapy, right? Like that does help. It's scientifically proven, but there's something more empowering about making something your own and really kind of just diving into it and following it through. And especially, for those of us who are perfectionists, and I'm sure many of your listeners are, really taking the time to polish it and making it as wonderful a product as you can possibly make it. You have the time right now to do that. Why not do it right now? And for those perfectionists, of who I am definitely a part of that group, by the way, being able to try something out is also really great. Try it out, make it a little bit messy at the beginning, iterate, just like you were talking about. I feel like when we're stuck in that place of fear, we often don't see that there are so many opportunities right in front of us. When we just take one step, especially a creative step that is outside of our scope of imagination, outside the box, suddenly we get to see all of the possibilities. And those possibilities are our future. They're your future. And that's what I really want for you. I want to bring to the world. I want to get more and more people in that place.
What a beautiful mission and a great place to wrap up. Maren, thank you so much for being here. Where can people find out more about your singing, your coaching, and obviously the podcast, the Bodice Ripper Project?
Yes. So my singing, you can go to marenmontalbano.com. My coaching is at askmaren.com. And my podcast, the Bodice Ripper Project, is at bodiceripperproject.com. You can also find me on Instagram at supermaren.
Of course.
So that's the easiest way to find me.
I'll be linking all that stuff in the show notes as usual, including the YouTube video from the cruise ship, if Maren is kind enough to share it with us. What do you think? What are our odds of getting a chance to look at that?
I think you might be able to see. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Check the notes, everybody, on this episode, and I'll see if I can link it up. Maren, the work that you're doing is amazing. I so appreciate your creativity and your ability to just have fun and bring joy back into this process, because I think it's easy to lose sight of, especially these days. So thank you for the work you're doing, and thanks for being here.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Awesome. See you soon. Bye. Big thanks to Maren Montalbano for hanging out on the show today. So much good stuff in there, and I don't know about you, but I'm going to see if I can slow down to the speed of plants for a while, maybe even crack open a good romance novel if I can find one here amongst all of my coaching books. By the way, if you go to askmaren.com/inspired, askmaren.com/inspired, you'll see all the different things that Maren is offering in her new program, when it starts, how much it costs, and a little bit more about what it's like to work with her. So that's askmaren, MAREN.com/inspired. You can also go to honestypill.com and check out the online business accelerator. Click any of the buttons on that page and book a free 30-minute discovery call with me, no strings attached, and see if that program is right for you as well. So lots of opportunities for you to get powerful coaching right now with no obligation. It's just my way of saying thank you for being here and for being a listener to this show. By the way, before I sign off today, as we're almost done with season 1 of this podcast, I hope these interviews are starting to get you thinking about where you are in your career right now, what your performance schedule looks like, how your teaching methods or studio has changed, and what your bank account looks like. Whether you're sitting in a full-time orchestra job waiting to get back on stage, or you're a freelance musician and most of your work is shut down, or maybe you're a music educator and you're still struggling with teaching online. There are so many opportunities available to you right now, just like Maren said in the podcast, if you're willing to open your mind to possibility, and if you can be honest with your limiting assumptions, and if you're willing to try something new. So if you have ideas, questions, or just want to talk about where you're at in your musical life right now, you at least owe yourself a conversation. And if you already have an idea for a business, then I really want to talk to you. Shoot me an email at chris@honestypill.com or go to Online Business Accelerator and click any of those buttons and let's connect. Okay, that's it for me today. This has been the Honesty Pill Podcast, episode 15. You can learn more at honestypill.com. Check out the free resource library. Lots of good stuff over there. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.